Hi, everybody. Welcome to On the Defense, the podcast where we love to sit down and have a little think about the intersection between finance and cybersecurity. And I know it's been a little while, so it's great to be back. We hope you all have been doing great. Hope 2025 has been treating you well. The conversation you're about to hear was just a really lovely, positive, and optimistic discussion to bring us back. In this episode, we're joined by Tyler Caskey, partner and director at TheBeanCounters, as well as former CFO and Big Four accountant. We know that finance leaders often face a tangle of regulations and operational complexity, especially when running international operations and making cross-border payments, and especially since cybercriminals love to take advantage of this complexity. But Tyler specializes in helping leaders find the right tech solutions for their unique organizations. You'll hear about what he thinks is the most exciting part of where CFOs are headed and how finance teams can get it right. And by getting it right, I mean how they can mitigate regulatory and cyber risks, all while ensuring they aren't painfully trawling through data on a Friday afternoon. Hey, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Really excited to get into some of this, particularly because it's always really good to get the perspective of a CFO, particularly one that is so tech-minded and so forward-looking. So I think a good place to start would maybe be your business, your consultancy, TheBeanCounters. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your mission is?
Yeah, thanks. We're a team of 8 here in Sydney, Australia, Indonesia, and New Zealand, and we help businesses select and install best of breed technology in Australia and New Zealand, but we've also done quite a few global projects across Europe and America. Our key method is trying to be a very safe pair of hands. You know, if there's anyone in Australia, we often recommend or say we're Ricky Ponting, like a very safe pair of hands in the slips. But our goal is to try to take that pain out of the change process. And while we're doing that, we also do like a lot of accounting improvements, a lot of finance improvements as well. We've found there's some really fantastic CFOs and finance teams there, but sometimes they need a bit of a hand finding and installing the best tech that can make them run a bit more efficient or a bit more safe.
Yeah, it makes sense because just because somebody is really talented and experienced in accounting doesn't mean that they might have the specialist skill set to know, what their tech stack should look like. Is that right?
Yeah, we've all very much got different talents. Like, I was pretty good at tax in my day, but maybe I wasn't like the best at structures or something like that. And so, we find our best accounting firms and our best CFOs are the ones that kind of absorb consultancy, information. And like I was probably a CFO that tried to do too much myself and too much internal. So, I've really seen how some people absorb, good HR talent. There's some risk people that do some really good work, and then we try to play in that system space, so enabling people to get good integrations and good efficiency, just from sometimes it's really cheap technology, like it could be $50 a month or it could be $5,000 a month, but if it's got a benefit that outweighs the cost, there's some really positive upsides for those internal finance teams.
Yeah, amazing. And you've already alluded to it, but spoiler, you are a CFO. Can you tell us your role? You're currently in the role of CFO at the Bean Counters. How did you end up in that role? What is your background? Were you always a numbers guy?
Yeah, I'm a director at the Bean Counters, but I think my social tag is partner at the Bean Counters because accounting firms recognise partners still in this world.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I was a business services accountant in Big Four, KPMG, and Deloitte for 7 or 8 years, and really just wanted some grassroots experience. So I moved into the financial controller, business partner role, and CFO roles in Sydney and Melbourne, Australia. My goal was to see if I could take what I would consider the most efficient and safe way of doing finance and install it into larger businesses. My business partner and I worked for like $10 billion listed companies, but I also ran businesses in the 50 million to $100 million revenue with finance teams of anywhere between 4 and 18, back when finance was a very slow process. 18 people did you used to need that many people to run finance. So after About 12, 13 years as internal finance. I went back into partnership into business services and then opened the Bean Counters in 2021. We definitely do some outsourced CFO work, but most of our work now is system scoping and implementation with a bit of added Power BI. But I still very much love and miss the CFO role. But probably my favorite parts of our role is helping those really good CFOs in the areas that they want help with as well.
I think something that gets talked a lot, and it sounds like you've maybe lived it, or you at least see it a lot with your clients as well, is that role of the CFO. Is that evolving? And if so, how is it evolving?
Yeah, it really is. I was at a conference in London last year, and I was in a room of like very tech-minded CFOs, and I was talking to some of them about how they're doing hiring, how they're running their finance, how they're running their month end, and it's miles different than it was 20 years ago. The amount of tech that people are installing that minimizes human interaction with honestly boring tasks like downloading, uploading transactions, downloading, uploading trial balance data. And I know this is an EFT Shore thing, but like cross-checking bank data, cross-checking accounts payable information against outcome of payments, those types of things. The top performing CFOs are just using every ounce of tech they can because computers are usually more reliable than humans. And I remember back in the day at one of the law firms I worked with, we did a Friday payment run. I was holding about 100 invoices every single Friday and just trying to like spot check as many of those bank accounts because it was all paper. We were paying by ABA or bank payments, but trying to get that amount of data and accurate, like you had so much reliance on internal controls and people that now like we've just got systems that can do it. So I've really seen the CFO role move significantly away towards automation. And then it has enabled some of the top performers to get into a more strategic kind of role to a higher value role. And, I remember sitting in that crowd thinking, I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. Like there are people here that are like driving multinational, multi-currency businesses from a CFO level and like really enabling growth, really enabling like there's some not private equity, but business founder equity growth, which was just amazing to watch.
Does that mean that it's not just having the background in accounting and finance, but also almost having a lens of like a technologist and having that skill set? It sounds like they're needing to be able to do a lot.
It has to be part of I call it like the five pillars of any finance function. You've got to be really good at compliance. And that doesn't mean the CFO has to be, but you have to have people in your team that are good at it. I know a lot of the NetSuite businesses we work with have like a full-time systems person, and that systems person might be in charge of integrations, user permissions, setups, reporting, automations. And so I see systems and integrations and use of technology. And in my finance roles, that went all the way down to like internet speed, laptops. We were big proponents in our law firms of unplugging mice and keyboards and giving people wireless mice and keyboards because just the ethos of being able to be a remote worker and take your mouse so easy was like such a big efficiency gain for some people. So we went all the way from like the bottom rung of technology up to the top. And then the finance teams obviously have to be great at like fraud prevention, risk prevention, and then all on the other side is like how they work with HR and marketing and reporting and such as well.
Yeah, the cross-functional abilities I think can be really tricky. I'm wondering now, I feel like I know it's a bit of a buzzword and it's almost like obligatory that we have to ask about it. But where do you see a lot of finance leaders and businesses at now in the current landscape with, artificial intelligence and AI kind of becoming more widespread? Feels like there's quite a big push whereas, a few years ago, automation was the big, or digital transformation was kind of on everybody's mind. And that's still the case. But now it's digital transformation and automation via AI sometimes. What are you seeing in the industry with that?
Yeah, I'm seeing some great things. The work that AI is doing, I think, is significantly reducing the risk for me. And that could be an AI agent that does things, or it could be like a large language model that tries to read things and speed up the process. Like the easiest one I'm seeing is AI agents that are connecting a supplier contract with a purchase order with an invoice or a supplier bill and trying to close that loop to say this is all green or this is has a red flag. The large language model I'm loving at the moment is the reading of supplier contracts and summarizing them for finance people. The amount of 50 to 200 page contracts I've been not forced to read, but had to read as a CFO to try to nail in those parts that are around insurances, risk, payment terms, pricing, all that type of stuff. That's like it's a really painful part of the job, and you're just not skilled at it in finance. And often you don't have like an internal legal team.
Mm.
So where the AI language models are reading that to me is just fantastic because it can summarize. You do have to check it, but it can actually speed up where you need to look is the play I love. And anything that can like detect an issue for me. So there's a system we use called Expert, which is like for large, it's either accounting firms or large multi-entity Xero, QuickBooks, My businesses. And that uses AI technology to run through all these accounting processes. And it just does red flags, orange flags. So if you get like an expert or an issue, it just flags up something that you need to look at. And that means the speed of analysis for a finance team can just go through the roof because it's so hard to look over. If you've got 30 entities, there's no way you're going to be able to run your eye over every transaction. So you need to use automation and AI to do those processes. And the best CFOs I'm seeing are do it in a safe way, usually in a corporate paid account. So they're using a supplier that has AI built into their tech,
Mhm.
or like there's open platforms like N8N and ChatGPT, etc., but they're doing it through business accounts, so they've got better data security.
Yeah, amazing. And it's such a contrast when you talk about, I guess, previously when you're having to go through everything manually and it sounds so stressful and high stakes. And humans are a lot of things, but we're not always the best at meticulous number crunching. It can be difficult when you're combing through in that way. I'm wondering though how what this looks like for companies with international operations. Obviously, your company has international operations. I'm assuming a lot of your clients are working internationally. We heard from other CFOs that we've heard that international payment verification can be difficult. There are time zones, there's the regulatory aspect of things I think is really complicated. How are these digital ways of working and automation and AI, how are you seeing that impact international operations?
Yeah, I'm loving what's happening in this market. We did a lot of work with some UK clients in 23 and 24, and watching them try to set up BACS files, which is the Australian ABA files, to make payments and automate their accounting system, be it Xero, be it Sage Intacct, be it NetSuite. Try to getting those out of their accounting system into the bank was just painful.
Mm.
And so it had a high level of frustration. And so if the tech couldn't easily integrate, people ended up doing it manually and using Excel files and uploading CSVs. And that just poses such great risk to me. So as soon as you've got human interaction, especially if you've got a single point of failure or a single person looking at that file, they can quite easily change their the bank account. So it opens you to fraud. What I'm loving is I'm loving what's happening with open banking at the moment with large global banks, online banks, like all the ones like Airwallex and OFX, and the technology there that is moving transactions through bank accounts without people having to download, upload files. Also, with all those approval steps in there, is just fantastic. And I know EFT sure plays in that market as well, which is great. Like it's so hard to get away from your big four kind of banks. So, if you're there, you really do want to be having a check in that place to make sure that those larger transactions and those volumes are hitting the right space. Like I've got a friend that's he lost his CFO job because he sent 175,000 from Australia to Singapore
Mm.
because of a fraudulent transaction that came across his email. And it happened. So like the more data you can have there checking, the better.
Yeah, I think what's disconcerting is that often we talk about all these really exciting applications of AI and technology, and there are so many amazing use cases. But then we also know that I guess the darker side of it is that there's a whole industrialized there's cybercrime syndicates basically that are also really excited about leveraging technology to work smarter and faster and
Yeah.
use stolen data, usually to personalize their tactics and scale them. And um, I'm kind of wondering, just mention an example of it going awry. Do you feel like those risks of fraud, are they higher for companies who are doing cross-border payments, particularly if maybe they haven't gotten quite as far as some of the ones that you've mentioned, like that are really leveraging tech as much as they can? What do the risks look like in that area?
Yeah, the risks are getting harder and harder to identify. Um, I've been involved in probably five companies in my time, either as a consultant or someone coming in to do some remediation that have had like money going out fraudulently. Not from an employee, but like they got tricked or scammed. And even one of the businesses I worked for, we had someone take over one of our key directors' email accounts and started sending false emails. And yes, again, they were asking us to do international payments because we were sending a lot of money international for purchasing goods over there. So I'm really seeing with those cross borders is you've either got to throw people at it or you've got to throw technology at it. And sometimes back in the day, we used to just pick up the phone and call people and go, hey, just confirming your bank account details. That that's an okay way, especially if you're on the same 9 to 5 schedule. Very hard to do for UK, US clients because your accounts payable people are probably not working from 6 p.m. till midnight. So I look at what technology can you use to make sure that you're sending it to the right place. Emails can be very risky as well. So I like supplier onboarding as much as I can. And I really like making sure you've got approvals of those invoices. And that doesn't mean like just an email approval. I mean, a system that's got really good approval of that invoice going through. If you can get purchase orders in the system, especially if you're like a goods business or a manufacturing business, all the better.
Yeah, because manufacturing, I know, has, lots of high value contracts and just this massive volume of transactions coming in and out of the business. And it's mind boggling to think that you wouldn't need some sort of tech or something to help manage, particularly once you get into a different country with different regulations. That sounds really tricky.
Yeah, the one like I worked with an engineering business in Melbourne recently. They do kind of manufacturing engineering, everyone's in the office all at the same time. And so their bookkeeper walks around and gets people to sign invoices and then hands it to the owner. And the owner looks at those for the signature because she knows the signatures and then she clicks approve. That's all very well if you're in the same office and you're in it, they've got a workshop, right? These people aren't on computers, they're literally making steel things. As soon as you get a business that's got multi-location, as soon as you've got multi-currency, multi-country, you absolutely need tech. Like it's a no-brainer as a CFO to get that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you are seeing some organizations do it really well. You've kind of already touched on, the way that they're using, they're kind of embedding things in their systems, in their tech stack to kind of mitigate those risks. What else do you think is a way that CFOs and business leaders in general can kind of minimize these risks as cyber threats start to not start, but continue to evolve and become more sophisticated? Are there any other things that you're seeing that are working really well?
Yeah. Look, this is an old school answer to start with, but it's always people. So at the moment, most of the time, money is moving out because of people moving the money. So even back when I got my first like head of finance job, I was like 27. It was in 2007. I had a chat with every single one of my team about, could you hold this invoice up in front of the whole board or partners and go, I know what this invoice is for. This is a new laptop for Sally's desk, right? So number one is we put a little bit of a personal accountability on it. Number two is we teach people what fraudulent emails look like. So, we're really keen on understanding that if an email sniffs wrong, maybe don't write back, right? You also can ask a question, ask someone else, hey, does this look kind of weird? Is number two. And then the third one is like really look at what ways we could mitigate issues. And some of the simplest things are the most important, which could be long passwords, which could be, there's some stats there about if your password's 12 letters or more, it exponentially increases the time of that stuff to break. And even having like two-factor authentication on almost all computers and logins and systems as a default, right? Ever since Optus got hacked back in like 2022, all the payroll systems are now 24 hours. So there's no reason, we shouldn't have that on our Microsoft or Google accounts as well. So I look at that people side first. But then I'm also really interested in like how automated systems can be. So the thing I'm really keen on is it's all very well having the most perfect approval process, but if that approval process has a human involved at a stage where there's like downloads and uploads, or if there is it only takes you to the eighth stage, but the last two are done by people, then you've got a higher risk there as well. So I'm always looking at technology that is closing those last little gaps. That to me is where the magic happens, because I keep thinking about a CFO that I worked with that had 40 zero files. We helped them move from mild to zero. And her biggest fear was paying the same invoice twice, because one of her bookkeepers put it into two different entities. And so we found her a piece of tech that enabled a duplicate invoice checking across multiple entities. And like the look on her face was like, now I don't have to manually check 50 invoices every Friday.
Yeah, what a relief. Because that's a terrible way to spend a Friday, in my
Yeah, yeah.
opinion.
And she was pretty good. Like she was one of the best I've ever seen picking up that data. But yeah, it's not a nice way to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good transition into the next question, which is that I think we've seen with banking and payments in general, there is a bit of a tension between security and speed. Customers want fast experiences; they want them to be easy and seamless, but then that ease and that speed is often what can facilitate fraudulent payments going off and not being able to be recouped. So cyber criminals know that, these instant payments, the speed of the payments works in their favor if it means that they can kind of move that money into lots of different accounts and preferably into completely different jurisdictions. So there's a little bit of a tension. And I'm wondering, is there a similar tension when you're running an AP or a finance function, the creating friction points, separation of duties, et cetera, does that impact the employee experience? And what is it like to try to strike that balance between giving employees that peace of mind and making sure CFOs aren't having to spend their Fridays manually checking that sort of data, but also creating enough friction that money isn't just moving out of the business into the wrong places?
It's probably the biggest thing I check when I start a new job, or when I started a new job as a CFO, was, I'd always look at the segregation of duties. I'm a big fan of, as soon as you've got more than three people in finance, you should have a money in and a money out person. And like in my larger teams, we had money in teams and money out teams, and there was absolutely no crossover. Sure, there might be some training there, but on those days they were never doing different work. That might have slowed some things down, because that means had to have different people doing certain bank recs, and all the bank recs might not be perfect, by 10 o'clock every morning, but that was okay. I think accuracy and like fraud prevention is the most important part. I always try to have cross duties. So if you've got a money in and a money out person, sometimes I'll swap their roles, not when someone's on holiday, but literally for a month. So that means they're looking for issues. So they know that they're not just the full person in control as well, which I think is a really important play. And then the speed is super important. So I worked in a couple of the law firms worked in, they were high property, and property settlements have to happen at a certain stage. So we had to clear them by 4 o'clock, because if the settlement didn't happen, the property purchase wouldn't go through. So these types of things, I remember the closest I ever got was 3:50, and that was probably 50 minutes too close for me.
Yeah, wow.
That's, yeah, because if that doesn't happen, then there's a whole trickle down of new documents, new signing, and new dates. The key thing I learned as a CFO is like, you've got to pull the handbrake on the pressure. It's important to do it right rather than rush. If you're not sure, make a phone call. And like, I've sat in rooms where I've been waiting for money to come in, and I've had a boardroom of like 18 people about to do a $40 million deal because they were waiting for me to say, yes, the money has been sent and confirmed that it's been received. Those types of things, you just cannot rush. You cannot put that pressure onto your team, and you also need to find the peace with the process. If something doesn't happen, it's better for it to not happen and be correct, and then happen and be wrong is my play. So, I even think about things like payroll. The more controls we can get on the final payroll payments, the better. But if we've got a sniff that something isn't right and something's not balanced, we might only pay half the payroll and leave the other half to the next day if something's wrong. Like, that's never happened, but we're not going to sign it off unless it's bang on. The last one for me is it comes down to like proper approval. And if you've got the right banking structures, the right people, but also the thing I'm really interested in, and this is where I want EFT Shaw's, insight as well, is like, how do we give the CFO always has enough information, but you've usually got a director or someone else that needs to sign off. How easy is it for them to get information that all those payments are verified? They're verified suppliers, they're verified bills. That stuff is such an interesting debate for me.
Yeah, because it sounds like you mentioned getting to those last few steps of a process, and there you've got humans involved. It sounds
Yep.
like trying to make sure that those humans, yes, closing the gaps wherever you can, but then also making sure that when humans are involved, they have the most accurate information that they can in order to help inform those decisions there in the 11th hour when it's time to let's say approve something or expedite something, making
Yeah.
sure that they have trustworthy data, that everything is okay and that there aren't any worrying anomalies. And it sounds like you've kind of touched on tech is really important and process is really important, but it also does sound like culture plays a role in that, and senior leaders needing to cultivate a culture around exactly what you said. It's better to be right and late than on time and catastrophically wrong. It sounds like that's something that starts in culture.
Yeah, and you need to empower your money out people. I often say to them, when I was a CFO, I was like, this is the AP payment and the AP process is your process. You're responsible. I report to you on that process, right? Like, sure, I'm going to be helping, guiding, make sure it's accurate, on time, low fraud, but you're the person that holds it. And so if someone tries to push you out of the process, like, my job is to back you up when you say no as well. But I'm also super interested in, like, if ABA files might die one day, if BACS files in London might die one day. Like, I really don't see the big banks with a need to be involved in those processing of payments. Like, once they've gone through an approval step, like, I've gone through I use a lot of my clients have used EFT Shore. So I've gone through all my supplier onboardings, all those types of things. I've loaded every piece of data that's ever been needed. But then I also think, it does come down to that human piece of those last little bits. And I just don't think long term the banks need to be involved in that. I just don't think, once it's gone through an approved step with an audit trail with two-factor authentication login, the final payments sure as hell should come out of the approval tech rather than the bank tech. I think we've just got that segregation of technology that's still very archaic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it differs based on country, but of course, we're going to have a biased opinion about how to solve some of those problems and ensure verification because, ideally, there are certain anomalies and issues that would be showing up much earlier in the payment process rather than, yeah, it is good to have that final kind of guardrail at the very end to flag something if it doesn't look quite right. But ideally, that data would be verified through a number of channels long before it ever gets to the point where we might be about to, if somebody is about to override a warning or a red flag that this payment, that the details don't look quite right. Ideally, it would happen long before that.
And it's even down to little things like GST. It's open knowledge on ABN Lookup if a entity, partnership, trust, sole trader, company is registered for GST. And if the amount of times I've seen GST inclusive invoices from businesses that are not registered for GST is very, very common. So, like all that tech, the more it starts to integrate and cross check itself, like I think the better it is. And that just means your compliance is right, but also your cash moves right as well.
Precisely. Well, I think you are a perfect person to ask this final question. I often, we speak very, very often with lots of people who specialize in cybersecurity, and they're very across all of the threats and all of, I guess, pernicious ways that technology can be used. But I feel like in your role and in this company, you're very familiar with all the positive applications of technology. So I'm really keen to hear, and I apologize if this is a bit of a curveball question, but I'm keen to hear what is the most exciting for you today when you think about where tech is headed, how businesses are using it? Is there anything in particular that really, really excites you and makes you feel really optimistic about the future?
I want I cannot wait for the day for end-to-end technology processing of transactional data. I'm 46 years old. I've been doing accounting since I was 20. Like I started doing the books for the suit factory or the suit store that I worked at. And the amount of transaction process that accountants and finance teams have done is just such a low value activity that no one really loves doing. Systems like Xero and QuickBooks and NetSuite are really good at like taking out the recurring transactions.
Mm.
However, we've still got like a lot of friction in point of sale and accounts payable for me. And what I really want to see is a point of sale transaction where the receipt auto generates and pops into the finance system based on a controlled card from finance that doesn't take 4 months and 5 pages of document to be sent. No offense to the big banks, but an electronic card with automated invoicing that automatically codes into the system and you really just tell it where it needs to go. That to me is just transaction time cost that I don't think we need to have. And also, it's so much easier to set like budgeting and controls on those types of cards if they're electronic. And then, like on the accounts payable, and especially into the payroll process, is around how automated we can have those functions. We're getting really close with systems like Deputy and Employment Hero and Rippling, where they're really good at taking rosters into timesheets into payroll into money going out the door. But it's still quite a fragmented process. And I feel the same with accounts payable. Like the more we can automate the supplier onboarding, the supplier contracts, the purchase orders, and making sure that it's accurate, but also like processed with an audit trail.
Mm.
So if it's a contract that the head of purchasing over in Western Australia approves, that he approves it. And then when those invoices come in, they automatically direct to him before they come to the finance team for payments. That type of automation, I think, is going to increase our value as finance people. It's also going to take away a lot of the fear of making a bad payment. And it's also going to speed up the ability to like do the right things in finance rather than just looking backwards. That means we can start looking forwards as a finance team to try to help the business grow, to help
Mm.
other people operate better, and to really just sometimes finance teams can have pretty bad reputations. Like I've heard the term barbed wire in our pockets, but a good finance team should enable the business to operate effectively and efficiently.
Absolutely, and steer them in the right financial direction and take that more strategic role, which we already know is happening. But it sounds like that sort of technology would really free finance leaders to do more of that steering and more of that strategic guidance.
Yeah, we're getting there. Like it's very much happening. But I think, with the movement of AI, I think we're going to start getting transaction movements from the integration, from the starting from A to Z. Z being the posting into the accounting system. Like that to me is like the coolest part of it. Without as long as you've got really good expense controls and security about who can get into the system, then there's no reason for to be approving these $50 invoices. They should just be approved and paid out of the business automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been like a really optimistic, uplifting conversation as opposed to some of the cyber threats that we're constantly hearing about. So, Tyler, I really, really appreciate it. And I know you're a busy guy, so we'll let you go. But thank you so much. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening to the latest episode of On the Defense. If you'd like to find out more about F-Shore, you can follow us on LinkedIn or head to www.fshore.com. Thanks again.